My name's Austin, and allow me to introduce myself. From the ages of 19 to 26, I traveled to about 35 countries around the world, and I lived in one. Interesting, right? Well, to make it more interesting, in that time period, I was making less than $10,000 a year. How is that possible? Am I a spoiled rich kid? No, I just managed my money correctly. Now, the world has taught me a lot. I consider it my real education. But above all, it taught me what money can do if you manage it correctly. So in this video, let's take a trip around the world. And I want to share with you 10 money lessons that I learned from 10 different countries, because we all use money in this world, but we all think about it differently. So let's start in my home country, and that's the United States. In the lesson, you don't need that much. Until about 2 years ago, I had never made over $10,000 in 1 year of my life. But with that money, I was able to travel to 35 countries around the world and graduate college debt-free. It seems like everyone is trying to become a millionaire, but you don't need $1 million to live your dreams. All you need is a plan and a frugal mindset. Now off to the next country, in the place that I proudly called home for 2 years of my life, and that's Ecuador. And the lesson, only buy what you can afford. Now, I've been to a lot of countries around the world, but I can only say that I really know two cultures, and that's the United States and Ecuador. And in Ecuador, they don't believe in taking out debt and loans. And if you go to South America, or if you just go to Ecuador, you'll notice that most of the houses aren't finished. And the reason is because they only buy what they can afford. They build their houses one floor at a time. So they save up enough money, and once they have enough money, then they build the next floor of their house. Pretty crazy concept, right? So the next country on this list is Peru. In the lesson, community is the strongest currency. Now, I've been to Peru 2 times, and both times I went, part of those trips, I stayed with this Peruvian family. And in that family, they had multiple generations living in the house. Some people living were disabled, and some people in the house were elderly, but they all worked together to support each other. In countries outside the West, where currencies and governments aren't stable, they rely on the one currency they can control, and that's community. And community is a currency that will never fail. So let's go to the next country where meat is abundance and the currency is crashing, and that's Argentina. In the lesson, the future is unknown. In 2014, I went to Argentina, and during that time, the exchange rate was 8 pesos to $1. Now, 8 years later, the exchange rate is 111 pesos to $1. I'm a firm believer in saving money and investing in the 401k, but you have to remember that the future isn't guaranteed. All we have and all we'll ever have is this moment right now. Tomorrow isn't guaranteed. So be responsible with your money, but don't deprive yourself of the present. So let's head over the ocean and go to our next country, and that's Germany. And the lesson, cash is consciousness. Most countries in the West have transitioned to societies where most of the purchases are through credit cards and debit cards. But there's one country in the West that still prefers to use cash over card, and that's Germany. Now, why is that? I'm not exactly sure, but my guess is because when you spend money with cash, you're more conscious with your spending. When you hand over some paper money, there's a little bit more consciousness than just swiping a card. And I think that for a lot of people, they would save a lot more money if they paid in cash because they would be more conscious of their spending decisions. So let's go a little bit north of Germany on our journey, and let's go to Denmark. In the lesson, always be looking out for the good deal. In 2013, I was a young 19-year-old in Denmark. And during that time, I remember being in a town on the border between Denmark and Germany. And in this town, a lot of Danish people would come to Germany to buy beer because beer is much cheaper in Germany than it is in Denmark. And the Danish people were looking out for the deal. And it sounds silly, but you should always be looking out for the deal, even if it means crossing the border to buy 10 cases of beer at a much better price. So let's keep heading north on our journey, and let's go to Sweden. In the lesson, happiness is free. On that same trip in 2013, when I was a young backpacker backpacking Europe, I went to Sweden. And one thing that people do when they're backpacking is they often go party. But when you're in Sweden, it's too expensive, so you can't party. So everyone just stayed at the hostel and chatted. We often connect happiness with money, but sometimes when you can't afford things and you can't spend money, You can find happiness through very simple things, just like sitting down with a bunch of people and drinking a glass of water, because happiness is free. Now let's go across the ocean to our next place, and that's Vietnam. In the lesson, the dollar is a powerful currency. In 2015, I went to Vietnam, and during that time, I bought a motorbike, and I motorbiked from Hanoi to Saigon in Vietnam. But that's a story for another video. But during that time, I would take out 1 million dong a week. This is what their currency looks like. But during that time, I thought that I was taking out $100. But when I looked at my bank statement, I realized that I was actually just taking out $50. I was spending $50 a week. In my channel, I talk about money, but I don't talk about becoming rich because I'm more interested in what you can do with the pennies. Because the dollar is a very, very powerful currency. People are often shocked when I tell them that I spent 90 days in Asia and I only spent $3,000 including airfare. It's because the dollar is a powerful currency. So let's go on to our next stop on the journey. Let's cross the ocean one more time and go to the only country on this list that I haven't been to, and that's Venezuela. In the lesson, money isn't real. Now, I've never been to Venezuela, but during my 2 years living in Ecuador, I met a lot of Venezuelans because there's currently a crisis going on in Venezuela where a lot of people have to leave the country. And in order to survive, they would sell candies on the buses for 25 cents a piece. But if you bought 4 pieces of candy, they would often have a promotion and they would take out a stack of cash. And they said if you bought 4 pieces of candy, they would give you a free Venezuelan note. Now, why did they do this? Because of something called hyperinflation, where their currency was no longer, it didn't have any value. We give so much value to this thing called money right here. But in reality, this is just a concept that we humans have made, and this isn't really real. So don't put too much value into this. And let's go to the final place on our trip. And this is not a country, but our home planet, and that's Earth. In the lesson, define enough in your life. I spent the better half of my 20s traveling the world, and I have a stack of currencies right here to prove it. I am fascinated with money because what it has allowed me to do in my 28 years of life. But money in itself will never do anything for you. You have to define enough in your life because you'll never have enough until you define enough in your life. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, you know what to do. And if you're from any of these countries I mentioned, comment down below. I'd love to hear your take on what I said. Muchas gracias por tu tiempo y que tenga un buen día. Nos vemos, chico.